Now,
Thanks
this, as Lisa was just saying, it's a reminder of technology's central role in people's lives and the potentially adverse effects. My next guest, Clegg, has written in his recent book that we have arrived at a crossroads and at a crucial moment. He talks about social media and artificial intelligence and the various disruptions. He believes, in his book, How to Save the Internet, that we need to forge a new relationship between technology and society. Arguably easier said than done. Clegg was president of global affairs at Meta, one of the top 5 in the company, Facebook, as it used to be known. He also served as the British Deputy Prime Minister in the first coalition government since the Second World War and was leader of the Liberal Democrats. His book is called How to Save the Internet. Sir Nick Clegg is with me now. Nick, we'll come to the book in just a second. Let's staying with AWS. What we were just talking about is, obviously, we'll find out what happened and why, but so many eggs in one basket, this coming together of technology and economies in such a way, it's very, very risky.
Well, I think I actually talk about this in the book. It produces these great platforms upon which we're all dependent in different sort of levels of what they call the tech stack, whether it's where your data is stored in the cloud or whether it's the operating systems which basically are the bottlenecks, if you like, for the scaffolding for the internet, whether it's our software, whether it's our hardware. They're all produced by a very small number of very large companies. And it's a sort of power paradox, because all this technology is very empowering to all of us in our everyday lives, but it also aggregates an enormous amount of power in the hands of a very small number of companies.
Now, I'm not for one second suggesting that AWS will be taking this lightly, because they won't be, nor indeed will their competitors, because it's there but for the grace of God go I. But we clearly are in, I suppose, is this any different to being reliant on yes, it is different, the local electricity exchange, or because that's only for one region or one country. This takes out nations.
Yeah, I think the sheer scale of these platforms, the global scale of the platforms. I work for Meta, which has, 4 billion human beings using its apps and services every month. So it's even by the standards of the concentration of the world, of the railway barons in the United States, or electricity and energy and water utilities, the sheer scale of these platforms is really quite unprecedented in industrial history.
And we need to address this now. Let's talk about this, because you were Deputy Prime Minister, Britain, 60-odd million people, but you go to Meta and it's 3 billion users.
Or more,
or more.
Yeah.
Could you feel that scale?
I think it's quite difficult to visualize that scale. And interestingly, people used to say to me, well, you're a senior executive in one of these big social media, these global social media platforms. Didn't you have more power than when you were Deputy Prime Minister in the UK government? Actually, I think in terms of the effect of one's decisions on the granular details of people's lives, I actually think governments still are demonstrably more important. They raise or lower taxes. They change the curriculum of what your child is learning at school. They decide whether your local hospital gets more funding or not. So these are very, very powerful and big platforms, but they don't replace politics and government in the way that is often alleged, in my view.
One of the criticisms, and you deal with this in the book, is there are really several about social media per se. One is the algorithm, that it's designed to sort of keep us hooked. The second is the danger for teenagers and the like. And of course, the third is just the societal damage, the echo chamber, which again, you talk of in the book. But in each case, you point to evidence that you say doesn't support the conclusion. And yet we all go away with a feeling something smells.
Well, I try and distinguish this something smells sentiment from what the hard evidence is, as has been looked at by academics and researchers in numerous studies around the world. And it doesn't mean, of course, like all technology can do good things, can do bad things, can be used by good and bad people. And of course, the job of these companies should be, and certainly the regulators and lawmakers too, to minimize the bad and maximize the good. But I do think that the pendulum swing from sort of euphoric belief that technology was only going to be a power for good has swung quite violently in the other direction in recent years, this so-called tech clash, to describe all of the world's problems as a technological problem. And I don't think the evidence bears that out at all. So the relationship...
How can you, I mean, you've got the numbers, and so I'm very dubious about sort of challenging you on it, because you've got studies up the wazoo from your previous job. But we all still have a feeling that these companies are using us and have little concern for the societal effect.
Well, I think it is certainly true to say that these are companies that are competing with each other and competing with each other for market share. They're not charities. You shouldn't look to the leaders of them to be philosopher kings. They're not elected by any of us. So, of course, you should keep what they do and say in perspective. Of course, they're pursuing their own interests. But I think there has been a tendency in recent years, every time something goes wrong, if there's an election outcome people don't like, or a referendum outcome they don't like, or strife in society about a subject, I think people are often too quick to say, it's got to be because of the algorithm. Sure, algorithmic systems can be very powerful, and they determine what order, for instance, you see things on your social media feed, but I think over-ascribing to them a sort of power that they often don't possess, I don't think is very helpful to understanding the complex interaction between human beings and technology.
On this programme, we interviewed the lady who wrote the book, How to Break Up With Your Phone. And in that interview, we talked about, unfortunately, because of the AWS outage, I can't play you a clip.
Right.
It's in the system.
Really?
Yes, it's true, actually.
Right.
It's in the system. For the dopamine and serotonin hit, that many of the apps are designed to give you a so you go back and look, have I got another message? And because you get that, we need to be concerned about that.
I think it is true, of course. Anything that tries to grab your attention, whether it's the way you market your program, whether it's the blaring headlines on tabloid newspapers. We live in a world, whether it's ads on billboards or on television, but I think it is all true that we've lived, of course, always surrounded by private enterprises and others who want to grab our attention, and they can do so, which is I think what you're going to say, by way of the screen in a much more intimate and intense way than perhaps was the case in the past. And I definitely think, particularly for kids and for teens, it's very important you have different guardrails for teens and kids, because I definitely think we should take a precautionary approach there. But I sometimes worry that people say, oh, shock horror, Company X wants more of your attention. Well, of course it does. If someone's producing a television program or a newspaper, they don't want to repel. You don't want to repel your viewers. You want to engage your viewers. You want your viewers to come back tomorrow. You're only natural in doing that.
You talk about the deal to save the internet. What's its core? Because obviously you talk about more transparency from the internet, from the providers, and we all know that wonderful phrase, which of course is such a cliche: US innovates, Europe
regulates, and the China imitates.
Exactly. And there's probably
a lot of truth in that.
I was saying, there's probably
a lot of truth. Unfortunately.
Yeah, but
unfortunately for Europe. Yeah.
But now let's talk about that, because I want to finish. You haven't got a drink, because normally we have a drinking game on this program. Every time
you didn't give me a drink.
Well, no, but every time somebody mentions the Draghi report, you have to take a drink, because everybody mentions it, but nobody's
but they're not doing it.
Exactly. So when you read or heard of seen the Draghi report, did you take that as being the clarion call that Europe needs to get its digital house in order?
Well, the Draghi report was much wider than the digital issue, but I so happen to think that the European Union, and I'm as passionate a European as you can find in the United Kingdom, if such people still exist, but I think the European Union has made a catastrophic error over the last half a decade, when it comes to regulating digital services, because they spent all their time beating their chests and saying, we're going to cut the Americans down to size, we're going to cut Silicon Valley down to size, we're going to clip the wings of these Silicon Valley companies, without doing the hard work to create, which is the point of the Draghi report, the scale of the European market, so that Europe can generate its own large tech companies in the future. And that has been a terrible failure.
Final, should we have been worried when we saw the tech bros at the inauguration? And I understand why. You want to be on the right side of an administration, particularly, but there has to be an element of arm's length. And your former employer seemingly has bitten.
Well, they all have. They all have. They've all. There's a
Does
great
that worry you?
stampede. My own view is, I think this is what you're alluding to. Yeah, I broadly agree as a sort of old-fashioned liberal. There's only one thing in a developed capitalist economy that's worse than having leading companies and politicians in each other's throats. It's having them in each other's pockets. Of course, there should be a sensible, grown-up relationship, but there should also be. I also happen to think, from the point of view of the companies, these engineering companies, that generally history suggests that technological innovation thrives when it's kept at an arm's length from politics.
I thank you, sir. Thank you very much indeed.